Elizabeth Alexander Mary Windsor was just 13 years old when she first met the young naval cadet who would change her life forever. The year was 1939, and the British royal family had visited the Royal Naval College at Dartmouth. While her parents, King George VI and Queen Elizabeth, toured the facilities, young Princess Elizabeth found herself captivated by an 18-year-old Greek prince named Philip. Philip Mountbatten was tall, blonde, and remarkably handsome. He had piercing blue eyes and a confident smile that seemed to light up every room he entered. Born Prince Philip of Greece and Denmark, he had lived a life filled with uncertainty and displacement. His family had been exiled from Greece when he was just a baby, and he had spent his childhood moving between relatives across Europe. The teenage princess watched from afar as Philip played tennis and cricket with other cadets. She had never seen anyone quite like him. While other adults treated her with formal respect and careful distance, Philip was different. He was direct, funny, and treated her like a normal person rather than a future queen. During lunch, he sat near her and made jokes that caused her to laugh out loud, something that rarely happened in the formal atmosphere of royal gatherings. Elizabeth's governess, Marion Crawford, later wrote about that first meeting. She noticed how the young princess couldn't take her eyes off the handsome cadet. Elizabeth followed Philip around the college grounds, hanging on his every word. When Philip showed off by jumping over tennis nets, Elizabeth clapped and cheered with genuine enthusiasm. For the first time in her sheltered life, she was experiencing what felt like a schoolgirl crush. Philip, for his part, seemed amused by the attention from the serious young princess. He was studying to become a naval officer and had little interest in royal protocol or ceremony. His childhood had been marked by hardship and uncertainty. His mother, Princess Alice of Battenberg, had suffered from mental illness and had been committed to a sanatorium. His father had largely abandoned the family, leaving Philip to be raised by various relatives. Despite his difficult background, Philip had developed a strong, independent character. He was intelligent, athletic, and possessed a quick wit that sometimes bordered on irreverence. These qualities would later make him both an ideal companion for Elizabeth and occasionally a source of frustration for the more traditional members of the royal household. After the visit to Dartmouth, Elizabeth and Philip began corresponding through letters. The princess, who had been educated privately and had little contact with young people her own age, found Philip's letters exciting and refreshing. He wrote about his naval training, his travels, and his thoughts on world events. His letters were intelligent, humorous, and completely different from the formal correspondence she usually received. Philip was serving in the Royal Navy when World War II began. Elizabeth, meanwhile, was coming of age during one of the most challenging periods in British history. London was being bombed nightly during the Blitz, and the royal family had to make difficult decisions about their safety and their role in maintaining national morale. During the war years, Elizabeth and Philip's correspondence continued. Philip served with distinction in the Mediterranean and Pacific theaters. He was mentioned in dispatches for his service during the Battle of Cape Matapan, and later served on destroyers in the Pacific. His naval career was progressing well, and he was gaining a reputation as a capable and brave officer. Elizabeth, now in her late teens, had begun taking on more royal duties. She trained as a driver and mechanic in the Auxiliary Territorial Service, becoming the first female member of the royal family to serve full-time in the armed forces. These experiences gave her a broader perspective on life outside the palace walls and reinforced her sense of duty to her country. The war years also brought tragedy to both their families. Philip's cousin, the Marquis of Milford Haven, was killed in action, and several of his German brothers-in-law were fighting on the opposite side. Elizabeth's family faced constant danger in London, and the stress of war took its toll on her father's health. Despite the distance and the dangers of war, Elizabeth and Philip's relationship deepened through their letters. She kept his photograph on her dressing table, and friends noticed that she seemed happiest when his letters arrived. Philip, serving far from home, found comfort in Elizabeth's steady correspondence and her obvious affection for him. As the war neared its end, both Elizabeth and Philip had matured considerably. She had grown from a sheltered princess into a young woman with a strong sense of duty and purpose. He had proven himself as a naval officer and had developed the confidence and experience that would serve him well in the challenging role that lay ahead. When Philip returned to England on leave, the attraction between them was unmistakable. Elizabeth was now 20, beautiful, and intelligent. Philip was 25, a decorated war hero with a bright future in the Navy. Their meetings became more frequent, and it became clear to everyone around them that this was more than a teenage crush. The stage was set for a romance that would captivate the world and face challenges that neither of them could yet imagine. Their love story was about to unfold against the backdrop of a changing Britain and a monarchy that was adapting to the modern world. The summer of 1946 brought Philip Mountbatten back to British shores after his naval service in the Far East. Elizabeth, now 20 years old, had blossomed into a poised and beautiful young woman. When Philip visited Balmoral Castle in Scotland that August, it became clear to everyone that their childhood friendship had evolved into something much deeper. The Scottish Highlands provided the perfect romantic backdrop for their courtship. Away from the formal atmosphere of Buckingham Palace, Elizabeth and Philip could enjoy long walks through the heather-covered moors, fishing in the clear mountain streams, and intimate conversations by the fireplace in the evening. Philip taught Elizabeth to drive, and they would race around the estate in a sports car, her laughter echoing across the countryside. During those magical weeks at Balmoral, Philip proposed to Elizabeth beside a quiet loch. There were no crowds, no cameras, no protocol officers, just a young man asking the woman he loved to marry him. Elizabeth accepted immediately, though they both knew that their engagement would need approval from her father, the king, and the government. The proposal remained a closely guarded secret for several months. King George VI was fond of Philip, but worried about his daughter's youth and the responsibilities that would soon fall upon her shoulders. The king also had concerns about Philip's background. Although Philip had served Britain loyally during the war, his foreign birth and his family's complicated political connections raised questions among some government officials and courtiers. Philip's sisters had married German princes, and during the war, they had been on the opposing side. His mother's brother, Lord Louis Mountbatten, was seen by some as overly ambitious and eager to see his nephew married to the future queen. These political complications required careful handling, especially as Britain was still recovering from the devastation of World War II. To address these concerns, Philip took several important steps. He renounced his Greek and Danish titles and converted from Greek Orthodox Christianity to the Church of England. Most significantly, he became a British citizen and took the surname Mountbatten after his mother's British family. These changes demonstrated his commitment to his new country and his future role. The formal announcement of their engagement came in July 1947, and the British public reacted with overwhelming enthusiasm. After years of war, rationing, and hardship, the prospect of a royal wedding provided a much-needed reason for celebration. Elizabeth appeared radiant in the official engagement photographs, wearing a stunning sapphire and diamond ring that Philip had designed using diamonds from his mother's tiara. However, the engagement period was not without its challenges. Philip found himself subjected to intense scrutiny from the press and criticism from some quarters about his suitability as a husband for the future queen. His direct manner and sometimes irreverent sense of humor did not always sit well with the more traditional elements of the royal household. Elizabeth remained steadfast in her choice throughout these difficulties. She had inherited her father's strong will and her mother's emotional intelligence, and she used both qualities to support Philip during this challenging period. She made it clear to anyone who questioned her decision that Philip was not just her romantic choice, but also someone she respected and admired. The wedding preparations took place against the backdrop of post-war austerity. Britain was still under strict rationing, and There was debate about whether a lavish royal wedding was appropriate when ordinary citizens were still struggling with shortages of food, clothing, and other necessities. Elizabeth herself was subject to rationing and had to save clothing coupons to purchase fabric for her wedding dress. Public opinion, however, strongly supported the wedding. People were ready for something beautiful and hopeful after the dark years of war. Letters poured in from around the world, many containing small gifts of food or clothing coupons from people who wanted to contribute to the celebration. The wedding dress became a symbol of hope and renewal. Designed by Norman Hartnell, it was made from ivory silk and decorated with crystals, pearls, and intricate embroidery featuring flowers from around the Commonwealth. The dress required special permission to use silk from Chinese silkworms rather than Japanese ones, as Britain was technically still at war with Japan. Philip, meanwhile, was dealing with his own challenges. He had to give up his promising naval career at a time when many of his contemporaries were advancing in rank. He was created Duke of Edinburgh on the morning of his wedding, but he struggled with the protocol and restrictions that came with his new position. The wedding day itself, November 20th, 1947, was declared a national holiday. Despite the gray November weather, over 200,000 people lined the streets of London to watch the procession. The ceremony at Westminster Abbey was broadcast on radio to 200 million people around the world, making it one of the first truly global royal events. Elizabeth looked stunning as she walked down the aisle of Westminster Abbey on her father's arm. Her dress caught the light from thousands of candles and the ancient stained glass windows. Philip, wearing his naval uniform, waited at the altar with barely contained emotion. When they exchanged vows, their voices were clear and confident, promising to love and honor each other for the rest of their lives. The wedding breakfast at Buckingham Palace was a relatively modest affair by royal standards, but the joy of the occasion was unmistakable. Philip's best man, David Mountbatten, gave a speech that had everyone laughing, while King George VI spoke movingly about his daughter's happiness and his confidence in her choice of husband. As the newlyweds left for their honeymoon at Broadlands in Hampshire, they were showered with rose petals and good wishes. Elizabeth had thrown her bouquet to her bridesmaids before leaving, a spontaneous gesture that delighted the crowds. They spent their first week as husband and wife at Lord Mountbatten's estate, enjoying quiet walks, reading, and the simple pleasure of being together without the constant scrutiny of public life. Their marriage had begun with tremendous hope and public goodwill, but both Elizabeth and Philip knew that greater challenges lay ahead. Elizabeth was heir to the throne, and her father's health was already showing signs of a strain that would eventually cut his life short. Their love would soon be tested by the weight of the crown and the demands of duty that neither of them could yet fully imagine. The early years of Elizabeth and Philip's marriage were filled with the joy and excitement of young love, but also shadowed by the growing awareness that their private happiness would soon be overshadowed by public duty. They moved into Clarence House in London, where they tried to create as normal a home life as possible under the circumstances. In November 1948, their first child, Charles Philip Arthur George, was born. Elizabeth proved to be a devoted mother, though the demands of royal duty often kept her away from her son for longer periods than she would have liked. Philip took an active role in his son's upbringing, determined that Charles would have the kind of stable family life that he himself had missed as a child. Philip's own childhood experiences had taught him the importance of family stability. Having been separated from his parents at an early age and passed between various relatives, he was determined to be a present and engaged father. He would often be found on the floor of the nursery, playing with Charles or reading him stories, behavior that was considered quite unconventional for aristocratic fathers of that era. In 1950, their daughter, Elizabeth Alice Louise, was born, completing what they hoped would be their family unit for the immediate future. Elizabeth delighted in these early years of motherhood, and the young family often spent weekends at the royal estates, where they could enjoy relative privacy and the outdoor activities that both parents loved. Philip continued his naval career during this period, and In 1949, he was posted to Malta as second in command of HMS Checkers. This posting gave Elizabeth and Philip a taste of what normal married life might be like. Elizabeth joined her husband in Malta, where they lived in a modest villa and enjoyed the kind of social life that young naval couples experienced. The Malta years were later remembered by Elizabeth as among the happiest of her life. Away from the intense scrutiny of London, she could shop in local markets, attend casual parties with other naval wives, and even visit the hairdresser without causing a sensation. Philip excelled in his naval duties and was promoted to lieutenant commander, then to commander. However, these carefree years were not destined to last. King George VI's health had been deteriorating since the end of the war. Years of heavy smoking and the stress of leading the country through its darkest hour had taken their toll. In 1951, the king underwent surgery for lung cancer, though the true nature of his illness was kept secret from both the public and, initially, from Elizabeth herself. As the king's health declined, Elizabeth was forced to take on more royal duties. She began representing her father at official functions and state events, gradually assuming the responsibilities that would one day be fully hers. Philip supported her through this transition, attending functions at her side and learning the complex protocols of royal life. Their duties took them on an official tour to Kenya in February 1952. They were staying at the famous Treetops Hotel, watching wildlife from the elevated lodge, when word came that King George VI had died peacefully in his sleep at Sandringham House. Elizabeth, at just 25 years old, had become Queen Elizabeth II. The moment when Elizabeth learned of her father's death was witnessed by few people, but those present described her remarkable composure. After the initial shock and grief, she immediately began asking about the arrangements that needed to be made and the duties she would need to fulfill. Philip, meanwhile, realized that his wife's accession to the throne would fundamentally change their relationship and their family life. The new queen and her husband flew back to London immediately, where they were met by Winston Churchill and other senior government officials. The sight of the young couple, both dressed in black and bearing the weight of sudden responsibility, moved many who witnessed their return. Elizabeth's first act as queen was to choose her regnal name, confirming that she would be known as Elizabeth II. The period following the king's death was emotionally devastating for Elizabeth, who had been extremely close to her father. Philip became her primary source of strength during this difficult time, supporting her through the complex arrangements for the king's funeral and the preparations for her own coronation. He put aside his own grief and his concerns about the changes ahead to focus entirely on helping his wife adjust to her new role. Philip's position was particularly challenging during this transition. As the husband of the reigning queen, he had no constitutional role, yet he was expected to support her in all her duties. He struggled with giving up his naval career just as it was reaching its peak, and he found the restrictions and protocols of royal life increasingly frustrating. The question of what Philip would be called became a source of considerable debate. As the Queen's husband, he was not automatically entitled to be called Prince Philip, and there was discussion about whether he should take a completely different title. Elizabeth wanted her husband to have proper recognition for his position, but constitutional experts worried about creating precedents that might cause problems in the future. Elizabeth's coronation was scheduled for June 1953, giving the royal household more than a year to plan the elaborate ceremony. Philip played a crucial role in the planning, bringing his naval expertise and his practical mind to bear on the complex logistics involved. He also insisted that the ceremony be televised, despite opposition from traditionalists who felt that the ancient ritual should not be exposed to the mass media. The coronation preparations took place during a time of significant change in Britain. The country was emerging from post-war austerity and beginning to embrace the optimism of the 1950s. Elizabeth's youth and beauty, combined with Philip's handsome presence and modern outlook, seemed to represent a new era for the monarchy and the nation. During this period, Philip also had to adjust to the reality that his wife now outranked him in all official matters. In private, they remained equals and loving partners, but in public, protocol demanded that Elizabeth take precedence. This was a difficult adjustment for a man who had been raised to lead and who had excelled in his military career. Their love for each other remained strong throughout these challenges, but the pressures of royal duty were already beginning to reshape their relationship in ways that neither had fully anticipated. The carefree days of Malta were now just a memory, and ahead lay decades of service that would test their marriage in ways they could not yet imagine. The coronation of Queen Elizabeth II on June 2, 1953, marked not just the beginning of a new reign, but also a crucial test of the marriage between Elizabeth and Philip. Westminster Abbey was filled with representatives from around the world, and for the first time in history, the ancient ceremony was broadcast live on television to millions of viewers. Philip played a unique role in the coronation, being the first person to pay homage to his wife after she was crowned. In a moment that moved spectators to tears, he knelt before Elizabeth, placed his hands between hers, and pledged to become your liege man of life and limb. The symbolism was profound. Here was a man who had given up his own career and independence to support his wife in her extraordinary destiny. After the coronation, the demands on Elizabeth's time became even more intense. State visits, official engagements, and the weekly audiences with the Prime Minister consumed much of her schedule. Philip found himself in the challenging position of being married to someone whose duty to the nation often took priority over their personal relationship. Philip dealt with these challenges by carving out his own role within the royal family structure. He modernized many aspects of royal protocol, bringing efficiency and practicality to centuries-old traditions. He also became patron of numerous charities and organizations, focusing particularly on science, technology, and youth development. His creation of the Duke of Edinburgh Award Scheme in 1956 gave young people opportunities for personal development and achievement, reflecting his belief in the importance of challenge and self-reliance. The 1950s were a time of significant adjustment for the royal couple. They had 2 more children during this decade. Andrew Albert Christian Edward was born in 1960, and Edward Anthony Richard Louis followed in 1964. The 10-year gap between and Andrew was partly due to Elizabeth's heavy royal duties during the 1950s, but it also reflected the couple's desire to establish themselves in their royal roles before expanding their family further. Philip's approach to fatherhood evolved as he gained experience and confidence in his role. With Charles and he had sometimes been strict and demanding, perhaps reflecting his own upbringing in a harsh boarding school environment. However, with Andrew and Edward, he was noticeably more relaxed and affectionate, spending more time playing with them and involving them in his interests. The 1960s brought new challenges as the world changed rapidly around them. The social revolution of the decade, with its emphasis on youth, rebellion, and questioning authority, created a difficult environment for the monarchy. Elizabeth and Philip had to navigate between maintaining the dignity and traditions of the crown while also appearing relevant to a changing society. Philip embraced many aspects of modernization enthusiastically. He was fascinated by technology and was instrumental in bringing computers and other modern equipment into the royal household. He also supported the decision to allow television cameras to film the royal family for a documentary, believing that it would help people better understand their lives and work. However, the increased media attention also brought new pressures to their marriage. Rumors and speculation about their relationship appeared regularly in newspapers and magazines, particularly during periods when Philip's official duties required him to travel extensively. Philip's direct manner and occasional impatience with protocol sometimes created negative publicity, which Elizabeth had to handle with careful diplomacy. One of the most challenging periods came during the late 1960s and early 1970s when several scandals affected the royal family. Princess Margaret's troubled marriage, The Duke of Windsor's continued demands for recognition and various financial controversies created a difficult atmosphere. Throughout these challenges, Elizabeth and Philip presented a united front, supporting each other through criticism and controversy. Philip's role as a husband during this period required considerable sacrifice and diplomacy. He had to suppress his own opinions on many political and social issues, since any public statement he made could be interpreted as reflecting the Queen's views. This restriction was particularly difficult for someone with Philip's strong personality and definite opinions on many subjects. The couple's children were growing up during this turbulent period, and both parents worried about the effects of constant public scrutiny on their development. Charles, in particular, struggled with the weight of expectation as the future king, and both Elizabeth and Philip worked to provide him with as normal an upbringing as possible under the circumstances. Despite these challenges, the marriage between Elizabeth and Philip remained strong. They developed ways of supporting each other that were not always visible to the public. Philip's sense of humor helped Elizabeth deal with the more absurd aspects of royal protocol, while her steady presence gave him the emotional anchor he had lacked throughout his childhood. Their shared love of horses and outdoor activities provided them with opportunities for relaxation and private time together. At Balmoral and Sandringham, they could enjoy long walks, fishing, and riding without the constant presence of photographers and officials. These private moments became increasingly precious as their public duties expanded. Philip also proved to be an excellent advisor to Elizabeth on many issues, bringing his practical experience and analytical mind to bear on complex problems. His naval background had given him experience in leadership and decision-making, and Elizabeth came to rely on his judgment in both personal and official matters. By the 1970s, they had developed a working partnership that combined personal affection with professional respect. They had learned to balance the demands of duty with their needs as individuals and as a couple, though this balance was sometimes precarious and required constant attention and adjustment. The foundations they built during these challenging decades would prove crucial in helping them weather even greater storms that lay ahead, including family scandals, changing public attitudes toward the monarchy, and personal tragedies that would test their love and commitment in ways they could not yet imagine. The final decades of Elizabeth and Philip's marriage would test their bond in ways they had never imagined during their honeymoon years. The 1980s and 1990s brought a series of family crises that threatened not only the monarchy, but also their personal relationship. Yet through each challenge, their love proved resilient and their partnership grew stronger. The troubles began with the highly publicized marital problems of their children. Charles and Diana's marriage, which had begun with such hope in 1981, deteriorated into a bitter and very public battle. Andrew and Sarah Ferguson's marriage also ended in scandal and divorce. Anne's first marriage to Mark Phillips had already ended, and even their youngest son, Edward, faced criticism over his career choices and personal life. Each of these family crises placed enormous strain on Elizabeth and Philip as parents and as representatives of the monarchy. The constant media attention, much of it negative, challenged their beliefs about duty, family, and the proper role of the royal family in modern society. Philip, in particular, struggled with seeing his children's private lives dissected in the tabloid press. The year 1992, which Elizabeth famously called her annus horribilis, brought multiple disasters. 3 of their children's marriages collapsed, Windsor Castle suffered a devastating fire, and public criticism of the royal family reached new heights. Throughout this terrible year, Philip was Elizabeth's primary source of strength and support, helping her navigate the crisis with dignity while dealing with his own frustration and anger about the attacks on their family. Philip's support during this period was both practical and emotional. He took charge of overseeing the restoration of Windsor Castle after the fire, applying his organizational skills and attention to detail to the massive project. He also provided Elizabeth with honest advice about how to respond to public criticism, sometimes urging her to be more open and accessible than her instincts suggested. The death of Diana in 1997 created perhaps the greatest crisis of Elizabeth's reign. The public outpouring of grief and criticism of the royal family's response challenged everything Elizabeth had been taught about royal protocol and emotional restraint. Philip played a crucial role in helping her navigate this crisis, supporting her decision to return to London and address the nation, even though it went against royal tradition. During the Diana crisis, Philip also showed his deep understanding of his family's needs. He insisted that William and Harry should walk behind their mother's coffin, despite Elizabeth's concerns about exposing the young boys to such public emotion. Philip walked with his grandsons, providing them with the steady presence they needed during one of the most difficult moments of their lives. As they entered their 70s and 80s, Elizabeth and Philip's relationship evolved into something deeper and more comfortable than the passionate romance of their youth. They had weathered decades of challenges together and had developed an almost telepathic understanding of each other's needs and thoughts. Their public appearances together showed a couple who had grown into genuine partnership and mutual respect. Philip's health began to decline in the 2000s, requiring him to gradually reduce his public engagements. Elizabeth, now in her own 80s, continued with a full schedule of official duties, but she clearly missed having Philip by her side at events. Their rare public displays of affection during this period, such as holding hands or sharing private jokes, moved observers who recognized the deep bond between them. The celebration of their diamond wedding anniversary in 2007 provided an opportunity for the public to recognize the extraordinary achievement of their 60-year marriage. In her speech marking the occasion, Elizabeth paid tribute to Philip's constant support, calling him her strength and stay. Philip, characteristically, made a brief and humorous response that nevertheless conveyed his deep love and admiration for his wife. Their final years together were marked by an increased appreciation for simple pleasures, quiet dinners together, drives around the royal estates, and time with their grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Philip's decision to retire from public duties in 2017, at the age of 96, allowed them to spend more time together, though Elizabeth continued with her royal responsibilities. The COVID-19 pandemic of 2020 to 2021 brought an unexpected gift to their relationship. Isolated together at Windsor Castle for months, they experienced a kind of intimacy and togetherness that had been rare during their decades of royal duty. Staff members observed that they seemed to enjoy each other's company immensely during this period, sharing meals, watching television, and taking walks in the castle grounds. Philip's death in April 2021, just 2 months before his 100th birthday, marked the end of one of the most remarkable partnerships in royal history. Elizabeth's visible grief at his funeral, sitting alone due to pandemic restrictions, moved people around the world. The image of her small figure, dressed in black and masked, said more about their relationship than any words could express. In the months following Philip's death, Elizabeth often spoke about how much she missed his presence and his counsel. Their love story had begun with a teenage princess captivated by a handsome young sailor, but it had evolved into something much more profound. A partnership based on mutual respect, shared duty, and deep affection that had sustained them through more than 7 decades together. Their marriage had not been perfect. No marriage spanning 73 years could be without its difficulties and challenges. There had been periods of tension, disagreement, and frustration. Philip's strong personality sometimes clashed with the requirements of royal protocol, and Elizabeth's dedication to duty sometimes came at the expense of their personal relationship. Yet they had found ways to support each other through every crisis and challenge. Elizabeth's own death in September 2022, just 16 months after Philip's passing, seemed to confirm what many had long suspected, that their lives had become so intertwined that neither could exist long without the other. Their love story had come full circle, from the magic of first meeting to the peace of final reunion. leaving behind a legacy of devotion and service that had inspired people around the world. Their relationship demonstrated that true love is not just about passion and romance, though there's it certainly contained both. It is about choosing to support, respect, and care for another person through all the changes and challenges that life brings. Elizabeth and Philip had faced extraordinary pressures and demands, yet they had never stopped choosing each other, day after day, year after year, until death finally parted them.